The push-pull game often feels like emotional déjà vu, repeating just when you think things are finally stabilizing. If they really didn't care, why did they always come back right when you started letting go? That question lingers because the behavior doesn't match indifference. Avoidants don't pursue love by moving forward, they pursue it by managing distance. When emotional closeness increases, they instinctively retreat. When vulnerability is required, they disappear. But the moment they sense you emotionally loosening your grip, they return, re-engaging just enough to restore balance on their terms. This cycle is driven by a nervous system that associates intimacy with danger. To the avoidant, closeness feels like exposure. It feels like being seen too deeply, needed too much, or expected to give more than they know how to give. So they pull away to regain emotional control. Yet distance triggers another fear: abandonment. The idea of you moving on, emotionally detaching, or no longer being available activates panic beneath their calm exterior. That's when the pull happens. Not with urgency, but with precision. A message, a memory, a moment of warmth that reopens the bond. In narcissistic dynamics, the push-pull game becomes a subtle form of emotional leverage. The avoidant learns that your emotional presence is stabilizing, even regulating. They don't need to fully show up, they just need to know you're still there. Your consistency becomes their anchor, while their inconsistency keeps you off balance. This isn't always conscious manipulation, it's survival behavior learned early. Control feels safer than connection, and distance feels safer than surrender. As the pattern continues, you start to adapt. You lower your needs. You wait through the silence. You accept emotional crumbs because they feel better than nothing. You begin to associate relief with their return, not realizing that the relief only exists because of the withdrawal. This is how the bond deepens, not through trust, but through unpredictability. Your nervous system becomes trained to tolerate instability in exchange for brief moments of closeness. The truth is, the push-pull game isn't about testing your worth. It's about testing safety. They pull away to protect themselves from intimacy, and they pull you back to protect themselves from loss. And as long as both fears remain unresolved, the cycle repeats. Not because they don't care, but because love forces them to face what they've spent a lifetime avoiding. The emotional breadcrumb game often begins so subtly that you don't recognize it as a pattern at first. They never fully show up, but they never fully leave either. There's always just enough contact to keep the connection alive. A message sent late at night, a sudden affectionate check-in after days of distance, a brief emotional confession that feels judged and sincere. These gestures matter because they come from a real place, but they are carefully limited. Full emotional presence feels overwhelming to the avoidant, so they offer connection in controlled doses, not to deceive you, but to stay within what their nervous system can tolerate. Commitment feels like pressure, presence feels like exposure, so they remain partially engaged, hovering just close enough to avoid loss, without stepping fully into intimacy. Over time, these small moments create a powerful illusion of progress. Each emotional crumb suggests that something deeper is forming, that consistency is just around the corner. In narcissistic dynamics, this pattern becomes especially binding because it places you in a constant state of anticipation. You wait for the next sign, the next moment of warmth, the next indication that you matter. The avoidant doesn't need to promise anything. The uncertainty does the work for them. Your emotional investment grows while their responsibility stays minimal. And because the connection never fully breaks, it's hard to walk away without feeling like you're giving up too soon. The hot and cold intensity switch usually follows the moments that feel the most meaningful. The day you felt closest to them was usually followed by distance. After a deep conversation, shared vulnerability or emotional closeness, something shifts. The avoidant pulls back. Communication cools. Their energy changes, This happens because intimacy activates a deep fear of losing autonomy or being emotionally consumed. Even when closeness feels good, it registers as danger afterward. To restore a sense of control, they create space. The withdrawal isn't meant to punish you, it's meant to regulate them. This sudden change leaves you trying to make sense of the contrast. You replay the connection, wondering what you did to cause the distance. In narcissistic-leaning dynamics, this unpredictability becomes addictive. The warmth feels rare and precious. The cold feels unsettling and unresolved. You begin chasing emotional consistency, not realizing that the inconsistency itself is what keeps you emotionally engaged. You start working harder for closeness, believing that if you can maintain the intensity, the distance will stop. But the distance isn't a response to failure. It's a response to emotional closeness itself. Then there's the silent control game, the phase that creates the most internal chaos. Their silence wasn't peace, it was power. When overwhelmed, avoidance often shut down instead of explaining. Silence becomes a way to self-soothe, to reduce stimulation, to regain emotional equilibrium. For them, it's regulation. For you, it feels like being erased. The lack of communication leaves you suspended in uncertainty, filling the silence with questions, self-doubt, and emotional tension. In dynamics with narcissistic traits, silence subtly shifts the balance of power. The person who withdraws sets the pace of reconnection. The one left waiting carries the emotional weight. You start monitoring your phone, your words, your behavior, trying to prevent the next shutdown. The avoidant feels calmer in the distance, while you feel increasingly unsettled. The silence doesn't resolve anything. It simply postpones clarity while deepening emotional dependence. Together, emotional breadcrumbing, hot and cold intensity, and silence create a loop that's difficult to escape. Each pattern reinforces the next. The crumbs keep hope alive. The intensity convinces you the connection is real. The silence keeps you emotionally off balance. And because none of it is overtly cruel, you minimize your own discomfort. You tell yourself they're just guarded, just overwhelmed, just afraid. Often they are, but understanding their fear doesn't make the dynamic healthy. Love that requires you to accept partial presence, emotional instability, and prolonged uncertainty slowly teaches you to abandon your own needs. Real intimacy doesn't rely on crumbs, distance, or silence. It's built on consistency, communication, and the willingness to stay present, even when closeness feels uncomfortable. The "I'm fine" emotional shutdown usually appears right when emotional honesty is needed most. The more you tried to talk about feelings, the more unavailable they became. You sense that something is happening beneath the surface, yet every attempt to talk is met with emotional flatness. "I'm okay. It doesn't matter. There's nothing wrong." These responses aren't signs that they feel nothing. They're signs that they feel too much. For the avoidant, strong emotions arrive without an internal roadmap. They don't know how to process vulnerability without feeling exposed or overwhelmed, so they shut the door on the conversation. Emotional distance becomes a coping mechanism, not a reflection of how deeply they care. In dynamics with narcissistic traits, this shutdown slowly rewires the relationship. You begin to feel emotionally alone, even while still connected. Your openness is met with withdrawal, and over time you learn that honesty leads to disconnection. So you soften your words, you minimize your concerns. You convince yourself that needing reassurance is a flaw. The avoidant appears calm and unbothered, while you hold the emotional tension inside. What looks like composure is often emotional overload being hidden behind indifference. The future-faking light game keeps the bond alive without grounding it in reality. They talked about the future, but never planned it. There are conversations about what could happen one day, vague ideas of traveling together, living closer, building something meaningful. These discussions feel hopeful, but they never turn into action. There's always a reason to wait. The timing isn't right. Things are complicated. They want to see how it goes. The future remains a concept rather than a direction. For the avoidant, this creates a sense of closeness without commitment. Talking about what might happen satisfies the emotional side of the connection, while keeping their autonomy intact. In narcissistic-leaning dynamics, this can feel like reassurance without responsibility. You hold on to the vision, believing it signals intention, while they remain non-committal in the present. The promise of eventually keeps you invested, even as nothing concretely changes. The jealousy without claiming game adds another layer of emotional contradiction. They hated the idea of losing you, but resisted calling you theirs. Avoidance can be deeply unsettled by the thought of you drifting away or choosing someone else. Jealousy surfaces not as open communication, but as subtle reactions, tension, mood shifts, withdrawal, or sudden interest. Yet when it comes time to define the relationship, they hesitate. Labels feel constricting. Commitment feels like pressure. They want closeness without being bound by it. In narcissistic dynamics, this creates an unspoken rule. You're expected to act loyal without being given security. You're discouraged from fully moving on, while also being denied the stability that would justify staying. This imbalance often leads you to overfunction emotionally, hoping consistency will eventually earn clarity. But clarity never arrives, because the avoidant wants the comfort of connection without the vulnerability of claiming it. When emotional shutdown, vague future talk, and unclaimed jealousy combine, they create a relationship that feels real but never solid. Each pattern serves a purpose. Shutdown avoids emotional overload, future talk maintains hope, jealousy prevents loss. Together, they keep the connection intact, while avoiding true intimacy. And because none of it is openly cruel, it's easy to excuse. You tell yourself they're cautious, guarded, or slow to open up. Sometimes they are, but the cost is quiet and cumulative. You start shaping yourself around their limits. You delay your needs. You accept uncertainty as normal. Love becomes something you manage instead of something you receive. Understanding these dynamics doesn't mean blaming the avoidant. It means recognizing that real intimacy can't grow where emotions are minimized, futures remain undefined, and connection is protected but never claimed. The testing your availability game is one of the most subtle yet emotionally gripping behaviors avoidants display. They needed to know, are you still there when I disappear? It often starts with small withdrawals, fewer messages, delayed responses, or sudden quiet. To the outside observer, it may seem like disinterest, but the avoidant isn't trying to push you away. Instead, they are quietly assessing whether you will remain consistent, whether your care is steady even when they step back. Your willingness to stay connected reassures them that the bond exists independently of their constant attention. Each time you reach out or continue showing up, it signals to them that emotional access is secure, which temporarily calms the anxiety that closeness often triggers. In relationships where narcissistic tendencies intertwine, this testing becomes even more potent. The avoidant doesn't need to voice insecurity. It's expressed through subtle absence. You, in turn, unconsciously prove your loyalty and devotion by enduring the distance. The more reliably you respond, the more confident they feel, and the more entrenched the pattern becomes. What begins as a simple test transforms into a rhythm of the relationship: pull, wait, return, repeat. Your consistency soothes their fears, but it also inadvertently teaches them that withdrawal will never threaten the connection, reinforcing the dynamic. Closely tied to this is the devalue then soften pattern. Right when you felt unimportant, they suddenly became kind again. After moments of withdrawal or emotional distance, avoidants often unconsciously devalue the connection. They may seem distant, distracted, or detached. This devaluation isn't necessarily a deliberate strategy. It's a natural response to the discomfort intimacy creates. When the emotional intensity feels too strong, they instinctively step back. But once enough space has been restored, they reintroduce warmth, attention, and kindness. The shift can feel sudden and confusing, making it difficult to understand where you truly stand. This cycle maintains emotional equilibrium for the avoidant while keeping you invested. The push and pull allow them to engage without feeling overwhelmed, while your focus remains on deciphering the changes. Over time, you may begin to expect these shifts, preparing for coldness and waiting for the return of warmth. The relationship becomes a pendulum swinging between reassurance and uncertainty, which subtly reinforces emotional dependence and teaches you to tolerate inconsistency as normal. Finally, there is the classic, "you deserve better" exit. When they say this, it's not selflessness, it's self-protection. Often this phrase appears when their avoidance feelings deepen to a point that challenges their internal boundaries. Love, closeness, and reliance start to feel suffocating. Saying you deserve better allows them to retreat without guilt, to step away from intimacy while maintaining their self-image as caring or generous. It is not an indictment of your worth, it is a shield for their own emotional regulation. In these moments, leaving doesn't mean the feelings weren't real. It means the feelings became too intense for them to safely navigate. In relationships marked by these patterns, the combination of testing availability, devaluation followed by softening, and the protective exit line creates a complex emotional landscape. Each behavior works to balance the avoidant's need for connection with their fear of vulnerability. You may feel confused, questioning your own worth and interpreting the actions personally, but the core of these patterns lies in the avoidant's internal struggle between intimacy and self-preservation. The consistency you provide, the emotional tolerance you offer, and the hope you hold for a stable connection all contribute to maintaining the cycle. Recognizing these dynamics is crucial for clarity and emotional freedom. These behaviors are not a reflection of your inadequacy, but of the avoidant's struggle to handle closeness. They are seeking a way to love without losing control. By understanding the mechanics of these patterns, you gain the perspective needed to step back, set boundaries, and evaluate whether remaining in the cycle serves your own emotional well-being. Love should feel mutual, consistent, and safe, not a continuous test of patience and endurance. The watching from afar game is one of the most quietly powerful behaviors an avoidant can display in a relationship. Just because they're gone doesn't mean they stopped feeling. On the surface, it may appear that they've completely detached, that they've moved on or lost interest. Yet in reality, avoidants often maintain a silent awareness of the person they care about. They don't call, text, or confront, and they rarely make their presence known in any overt way. Instead, they watch, they observe, sometimes from a literal distance, sometimes from the shadows of social media or shared circles. Their attention is subtle but intentional. It's their way of staying connected without exposing themselves to vulnerability. They want to feel the bond without fully opening the door to the risks that closeness demands. This behavior is difficult for partners to process because it's invisible, yet emotionally present. You sense their attention, but you can't hold it, touch it, or respond to it directly. You notice little cues. They may like a post, comment subtly, or appear in your periphery through mutual friends. Each small action triggers curiosity, hope, or even anxiety, making it hard to fully let go. The avoidant isn't trying to manipulate you. Rather, they are seeking a form of closeness that feels safe. Direct engagement carries too much risk. Emotional exposure, responsibility, and the vulnerability of intimacy can be overwhelming for someone who instinctively fears engulfment. Watching allows them to maintain an emotional tether while staying protected. For the avoidant, this distant attention serves multiple purposes. It reassures them that the connection still exists, even if it's quiet. It allows them to experience a sense of closeness without the pressure of reciprocity. It also gives them moan over the intensity of their engagement. They can withdraw completely if the emotional landscape becomes too demanding or intensifies subtly when they feel secure. From the perspective of the partner, It can feel confusing, frustrating, and even painful. You sense the bond and yet can't fully access it, leaving you in a state of emotional ambiguity. But understanding the logic behind it reveals that this pattern isn't about rejection, it's about self-preservation. Closely related to this is the pattern of the one person they never let go of. They detach from everyone except the one who made them feel safe. Avoidants have a tendency to keep emotional distance from most people in their lives. They may struggle to form lasting bonds or lean heavily on independence as a form of protection. Yet there is usually one person who breaks through that armor. This is the individual who loved them without judgment, without demanding that they change, without pushing them into uncomfortable vulnerability. The memory and influence of this person linger long after the relationship ends, quietly shaping how the avoidant experiences intimacy in the future. This enduring attachment is rooted in the emotional imprint of safety. The avoidant recognizes, consciously or subconsciously, that this person accepted them fully, flaws, fears, and all. Unlike others, who may have triggered defensive walls or exposed insecurities, this individual provided connection without pressure. That sense of security becomes rare and precious to the avoidant. Even when the relationship shifts or they create distance, that bond remains active in their internal emotional landscape. It's a reference point for what safety, trust, and authentic care feel like, something they rarely allow themselves to replicate with anyone else. For the person on the receiving end, this dynamic is both profound and complex. It explains why an avoidant can leave a relationship physically, but maintain a quiet emotional connection. They are not emotionally absent. They are selectively present, preserving attachment while limiting vulnerability. It also highlights why avoidants often struggle to fully commit later. The memory of the person who gave them safety sets a standard that is almost impossible to meet again. They may crave closeness, but any new connection is measured against this internalized reference point, making it difficult for them to engage fully without fear of repeating past overwhelm. The combination of watching from afar and holding on to that one enduring connection can create a powerful emotional tension in relationships. On one hand, the avoidant's attention, even if indirect, communicates ongoing care and attachment. On the other, the lack of direct engagement creates uncertainty, leaving the partner to question whether the feelings are real or if the distance signifies disinterest. This push and pull is subtle but psychologically potent. You may feel drawn to maintain the connection, interpreting small signs as meaningful, while simultaneously experiencing frustration at the lack of clarity. The ambiguity itself strengthens emotional bonds, creating a cycle where longing and curiosity intertwine with the desire for closure. For avoidance, this pattern functions as both protection and regulation. Direct closeness can be overwhelming, threatening their sense of autonomy and triggering fears of dependency. Watching from afar allows them to maintain connection without entering the intensity of active involvement. It keeps them tethered without surrendering control, balancing attachment needs with the necessity of self-preservation. This also explains why avoidants sometimes seem emotionally distant, yet retain the ability to recall details, remember past conversations, and reference intimate experiences long after the relationship has changed. Their attachment remains alive internally, even if it's not always accessible externally. The one person they never let go of also serves as a blueprint for future relationships. Avoidants measure new partners against the emotional safety they once experienced. They unconsciously search for the same non-demanding, accepting dynamic that they once had. This is why avoidants often struggle with commitment or intense closeness, because no one else may replicate the exact combination of freedom and security they once received. The emotional influence of that person lingers, affecting how they navigate vulnerability, attachment, and intimacy for years, sometimes even decades. From a psychological standpoint, these behaviors highlight the complex interplay between attachment, fear, and memory. Avoidants are not incapable of deep feelings. They are adept at managing the risks associated with those feelings. Watching from afar and holding on to a special connection are strategies that allow them to experience attachment without feeling overwhelmed by intimacy. For their partner, understanding this dynamic is key to navigating the emotional landscape of a relationship with an avoidant. It helps explain behaviors that might otherwise be interpreted as indifference, detachment, or rejection. In reality, the attachment is very much alive, even if expressed in indirect, subtle, and sometimes frustrating ways. Ultimately, the watching from afar game, and the one person they never let go of, reveal a fundamental truth about avoidance. Attachment and love exist even in the absence of physical proximity or verbal expression. Their behaviors are shaped by a tension between the need for connection and the fear of vulnerability. They maintain emotional bonds silently, selectively, and carefully, preserving both their sense of safety and their attachment to the person who made them feel understood and accepted. While these dynamics can be challenging for partners to navigate, understanding them provides clarity. It highlights that the avoidance withdrawal is not a measure of your worth, but a reflection of their internal strategy to balance closeness and self-protection. By recognizing these patterns, you gain insight into the emotional logic behind avoidant behavior. You can begin to differentiate between absence that is protective and absence that is truly indifferent. You can understand why certain people linger in their hearts and minds while others fade. And most importantly, you can use this understanding to make conscious choices about your own emotional boundaries and needs. Love with an avoidant is rarely linear, but it is never devoid of feeling. The bond they maintain, quietly and from afar, is a testament to the way connection, safety, and emotional resonance can endure, long after distance has been created and long after words have faded. Here's the reality: avoidants don't withdraw, test, or distance themselves because they don't care. They do it because love exposes the parts of them they've spent a lifetime shielding. Every silence, every push, every hesitant step toward closeness is their way of protecting themselves from being overwhelmed. It's not a reflection of your worth or your importance. It's a reflection of their fear of being seen too fully. And while their presence may be inconsistent, their attachment often lingers quietly beneath the surface. True freedom comes when you stop trying to manage their fear and start prioritizing your own heart, your own boundaries, and your own emotional clarity. That's when you stop being a participant in their patterns and start stepping fully into your own power.